welcome to episode 18 of DWP 2022. In episode 17, we discussed the metaphysical phenomena and how this impacts on African knowledge systems. This is important because in this season, we are focused on the fact that whoever controls Africa also controls the world. And therefore, in Africa, that's going to control itself and be the next superpower has to control its own advanced knowledge systems. And that knowledge system has to be based on African beliefs and value systems. That's why in episode 17, we covered 12 principles that guide African knowledge systems. And I'll summarize those in 4 today just to recap. Most important, number 1, is to view industrialization as economic transformation of the entire cultural landscape. It's transforming the whole of society. So industrialization is not a technical process. It's a journey of transforming a society's family systems, social systems as a whole, the way the educational system discharges its duties, the legal systems have to change. It is a re-engineering of a whole cultural foundation of a people. Secondly, civilization is not a universal truth. So different parts of the world, different nations will progress in advancing their society differently. There's a billion ways in which any society could advance itself. So there's no one way of civilization. It is actually not even a majority thing. Knowledge is not a numbers game. Quite often, the majority are actually wrong. And it is for the bold and courageous to always point that out. Although we know in history, people have been executed because they think differently when, in fact, later on, they are born out to have actually pinpointed the truth. So for Africa, thirdly, all that boils down to the 3 mutualities which anchor civilization in Africa. Understanding at national level, at societal level, mutual respect for the divergence of views and belief systems, mutual benefit, which we all ultimately have to share the same planet and the same air and the same levels of peace and stability. And then, of course, mutual responsibility, meaning we have to be accountable to each other. And those are the principles that build the societal pillars. And finally, it is knowledge, intellect. It is the capacity to keep generating solutions that matter. In other words, problems are merely an absence of higher level of thinking. It's not a presence of evil or the devil or demons, as today most of us have degenerated in our belief systems. So once again, episode 17 really anchored us in this link between the metaphysical phenomena as a key anchor into the world of creativity and innovation for Africans. And when we pinpointed the elements of metaphysics and knowledge development, I can also sum that up into 3 main things. The first being that cultural intelligence is continuous crafting of a way of life. It's not a fixed thing. There's no determinism about culture and knowledge. And metaphysical underpinnings just mean the belief systems continue to evolve as experience guides intuition and creativity. Secondly, that answers lie within, not externally, and that self-discovered truth is the most important liberating truth, because one's truth is not the same as the next one's. Knowledge should never be copied and pasted from one culture to another. It has to be co-created. It has to be Africanized in our case, so that we adhere to the understanding that knowledge is a system. You touch one, change it a little bit, you don't know what other part is also affected. So co-creation from within. Finally, that metaphysical phenomena in African culture, like any other culture, is the main basis on which people understand reality, on which they understand what being is and the nature of existence. It is the intelligence. Metaphysics is the deepest intelligence that promotes a common base for unity of a people, a sense of belonging in community. The three mutualities ever said. Harmony with the environment, which Africans were always the best. Harmony with each other in terms of good moral behavior, which always trumps the idea that a police force guarantees peace in society more than the moral code. So we concluded that African metaphysics is crucial to Africa's development as a continent, and that in any case, before slavery and colonization, Africa was growing and developing at its own pace based on its own belief systems. So more than 100 years of colonization has failed to completely kill African belief systems. And that more than 100 years later, Africans are now realizing, hey, we're never going to be Europeans or Asians. We have to develop on our own basis. We have been running away from this for a long time. Now, the whole continent, all 55 countries, none has really taken off at a level which we know we are capable. We continue to underestimate the impact of culture on development. Development is actually none other than just recreating and re-engineering the existing culture. So I won't hesitate to conclude here that colonization was an attempt at cultural genocide to completely erase African cultural underpinnings so that, as was attempted, and we still see residual effects of an attempted cultural genocide. A people, an African people who still are schizophrenic, driven by fear, not being able to fully grasp the extent to which we're going to liberate ourselves, both economically and culturally, on the basis of copying and pasting European and Asian models. So this particular element of schizophrenia, split cultural mentality by Africans, is a thing that we at DWP are saying we have to put that to bed. The continent has great potential not only to grow fast, but as we have already convinced you, be the next dominant culture in the world, because there will be more Africans than any other group by the middle of this century, and the largest economy by 2060 at the latest. So I'll conclude by just pointing out that this whole dissemination of African knowledge systems, which we are addressing in these sessions, is a serious matter. I mean, Africans have even stopped using common sense. I mean, you see in every field of society how we continue to do things that don't work because we stopped using common sense. An educational system which is completely bankrupt of any use to society, we still run to those same schools. A religious system which has become rotten, and people still go not only to pay monies to a corrupt system, but are not likely to even get the spiritual redemption they are looking for. Please, let's go back to being able to use common sense. That's why today I am going to cover the general theory of an African Renaissance, which comes from my 40 years of dealing with developmental issues in Africa and realizing that Africa is not likely to industrialize or to fully industrialize on the basis either of a European model of industrialization or the Asian, but rather that Africa will borrow from both systems and still come through with a much more intelligently configured Afrocentric consciousness around a uniquely advanced industrialized African society. So I'll be going into the facts on this matter shortly. Thank you very much. So welcome back. Let me just point out the general theory of African Renaissance. You'll find it's got major disturbing facts, but a beautiful hypothesis and a proposed solution which makes everything so simple. So let me start by just fact number one is that the entire African continent, all 55 African countries, none, not one, is a fully industrialized, high-income country. Not one. So it can be a mistake. Either most countries are trying to move from low income to middle income. Those who get to middle income never go beyond that. They get caught up in a middle income trap. So that's a fact. 55 out of 55 African countries are nowhere close to being an industrialized high-income country. Not even our most advanced economies like South Africa or Nigeria. Very far. So the theory, the general theory, is split into four elements. These are the four elements for me which constitute society as a whole and how knowledge is to be developed. It is four major groupings of knowledge, in my opinion. And they go as follows. Number one is the social, cultural aspects. Number two is the business, economic aspects. Number three is the politics, governance. And number four, finally, is the technology environment. So I'll go through each one of these for me to demonstrate why in each of the four, every African country has failed to advance to the next level. Social, cultural. Now I use the double terms because for each one is the micro usage and then the macro usage. So social is the macro usage because that's how we see the structure of society, families, communities, nations, etc. Culture is the underlying software, belief systems, etc., which drive the social structures. So social, cultural is the starting point. And because we are Africans, we always start at family because the family institution has been the greatest invention of all time and worked best in Africa. It's now decaying. We now see things that we never dreamt would happen to Africa. Family systems is in big trouble. Trying to copy and paste a Western kind of nuclear family system. They are destitute children all over the place on the streets. Even old people are now destitute because the families won't look after them. You can go through so many challenges that African family system is now facing, including major challenges with divorce and all manner of challenges that the family law system is failing to deal with. Community is decaying because all the key systems in a community before are crumbling and they're expected to be delivered by the state because before the community could deal with all manner of issues. They could deal with any conflicts that happened in the family. They could deal with environmental protection. They dealt with many, many issues, which today they're not able to deal with. Now, in communities where you hardly had any crime, where issues were resolved quickly, you now have a situation where it's a free-for-all. I don't need to go into detail. We know the community system is crumbling. Religion has become the opium of the poor, because Africans are the poorest in the world. They're also the most religious, because what religion does is to instill even more fear in people and even reduce capacity for self-reliance and all the gifts that the Creator gave us, capacity to think for oneself, all those are abandoned. So the more religious people become, the more fearful they are, the more they delegate the God-given gifts to other people. They ask other people to think for them. They even ask other people to eat their money for them. So it's a chaos. When it comes to our traditions that lead to our legal systems and our regulatory systems, these are mixed up. We have European laws mixed with African laws, and at every level, there are endless challenges. The laws cannot be resolved at community level using African legal systems. They go to the European court systems, and challenges never end, especially at family level, where issues like inheritance and so on are now one of the biggest problems in Africa. Why? Because people are not looking at the underlying metaphysical elements and the belief systems and the values. And let me just use the example of inheritance. Throughout Africa, inheritance in African law and traditions was based on that when one departs, inheritance starts with responsibilities. One inherits responsibilities for those who are destitute, who are remaining, who are still dependent. So if I die, there's no automatic inheritance of my property, but my eldest son could be allocated usually the responsibility to inherit the name. You are now the father of the family. But if the mother is now aged, the youngest son could actually be given the responsibility to look after the mother, and therefore resources are allocated accordingly. So today in Africa is the exact opposite. We have taken the European idea that one inherits property before, and you don't have to inherit responsibilities of those who are being looked after by those properties. It's sad because we just copy and paste these European laws. And then finally, under social, cultural is the educational system, which has become damaged. Education is the DNA of any society. The educational system should be a reflection of its cultural underpinnings and traditions, so that you're continually revamping those and you're continually making it possible for young people to learn quickly how to live and experience a better life in society. I don't need to go to town on this one. We've talked about this before. Second area is business and economics. I've already pointed out that every one of the 55 countries is in a middle income trap. It's a dual economy, unorthodox economic transformation processes because of these dual economies. There's rapid urbanization throughout Africa, but with no jobs in the cities. But urbanization should be driven by manufacturing, and no jobs is not the orthodox way to urbanize. So I won't even go to task here, because then we confuse business with economics, because in our unorthodox type of economies, you can see businesses, whether they're local or foreign businesses, doing quite well. But doesn't mean the economy is growing, because businesses are not the economy. The economy is the capacity to ensure that the majority of the population is part and parcel of the industrialization process. They participate in organized mass production of raw materials. They participate in organized mass processing of raw materials, and most of the products are consumed locally. Now, that's not happening in Africa. So the entire public budget expenditure system is still very much in silos, 20, 30 different ministries, but these are not aligned with our stage of the economy, because each ministry is just a silo, delivering education, health, industry, and so on. In a situation where the majority of people are rural, and the budget architecture is supposed to primarily lift rural into the industrial base of the economy. But no, the developmental process, like I said, has been dualized. Majority of people are disconnected to the processes. So the public budget misses a lot of people. There's no spatial justice. Towns are just commercial and administrative centers. They should be manufacturing centers. So I would say finally that as a result of this level of dysfunctional economies, most of our governments, our countries, rely on donor assistance. And because of over-reliance on donors and international entities, what that means is that most public policies around development are not even nationally developed. They're handed over to us by our benefactors. Once again, we're not going far. When it comes to politics and governance, I want to say something that may actually be a bit controversial, but I need to say it to make the point. I start with the poor economic performance, which I've said leads to increased poverty, increased unemployment. We're in a middle income trap. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Now, that is the basis of politics. You see, in any situation where incomes diverge, the rich get richer and poor get poorer, it doesn't matter how good a government is. It doesn't matter how well elected the government is. There's going to be great divergence in the way poor people see the way forward and well-off people see the way forward. Let me give you a drastic example. South Africa. Remember in November of 2017, the ruling party in South Africa, the ANC, passed a resolution at their Congress to say we are going to have land expropriation without compensation. Now, this is the most advanced economy in Africa, where 85% of the land has already been securitized in their financial systems, and a lot of the listed companies own that land, and a lot of the foreign investors actually own that land. But you have the ruling party saying land acquisition without compensation, because 55% of South Africans are poor, can't afford 3 meals a day. But the 5-10% who are the richest in South Africa have securitized all the land. It's part of an advanced economic system. So for them, expropriation of that land without compensation doesn't make sense. They think they're in a first world economy. So the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer means that they're not going to be good economic policies that will please both and pull the whole economy. So a lot of what Africa faces today in terms of our political problems cannot be solved by Western-style politics, where you just elections, winner takes all. In most cases, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't matter how many elections we hold in Africa. The next government is still faced with a middle income trap. The next government has no way out because you are focused on the wrong thing. We now need to understand that it's beyond a numbers game. We need to bring back African political values of inclusion, deep dialogue, deep debate, consultation, inclusion of people, so that at the end of the day, it's not about elections and numbers of elections. It's the extent to which we debate our issues politically at community level and go beyond these small boxes of which political party one belongs in, and be able to deal with our political issues and build public administration systems that deliver development. That's politics. And then finally, technology and environment. Now, if we go back to African metaphysical underpinnings, you find Africans knew there's no distinction between technology and an environment, because technology is an innovation that improves how we experience something in the environment. So in every field, it's the same thing. Agriculture, technology just means something that helps us to improve the level at which we produce a certain crop or livestock, the quality, etc. It's an attempt to improve what already happens in the environment. So, same thing applies in telecommunications, because historically we talk when we shout at each other, then we invented the drum, and then the telegraph, and now one is on the mobile phone talking to somebody way 10,000 miles away. It's just a piece of technology to improve what one already does naturally in the environment. So you can go every field: engineering, military science, travel. Technology is an enhancement of human experience on something that already happens in the environment. But the way we have experienced this in Africa, we have technology as dumping of what the Europeans and Asians are able to dump on Africa, and quite often destabilizes the environment and leaves us worse off, poorer and sicker people. It's a big one, once again, and I won't go any further. All I wanted to do was to point out that, and that's the first fact. All 55 countries in Africa, without exception, are struggling in those 4 major areas. And it cannot be a mistake. So that takes me to fact number 2, that if that's the case, if every African country is failing to break through the middle income trap into an industrialized high income country, it therefore means, just from pure scientific reasoning, we have to look for the deepest causal factor. There must be one factor. That's why everything is not working. If we look at the symptoms, we misdiagnose the problem. Because you look at elections, you think, oh, some are not democratic, some are stolen, some are not good. So Africa's problem is political. You go to every element I've touched in the 4 categories, there are countless symptoms and problems. So we have to look for the deepest problem, the most underlying problem. And I've done that over the last couple of decades. And I have come up with the following conclusion. There is indeed one major reason that affects everything else. And that is simply the following. There is no cultural intelligence, no African wisdom in the development strategies that we use in Africa today. It's mostly either copying and pasting of other people's systems and knowledge systems. But when we do things using our own knowledge systems, you find amazing results. So I would say that we have misunderstood Western civilization, we have misunderstood the Asian tiger model, and now we are rapidly urbanizing where there is no manufacturing. We are therefore failing to understand that in every field, social, cultural, business, economics, politics, governance, technology, environment, in every one of those fields, if our society, and it will be advancing faster, we need to impregnate our development strategies with cultural intelligence, which makes knowledge, technology more relevant to our traditions and our belief systems. So in many ways, a failure to fully industrialize Africa may actually be a blessing in disguise for us. We need to accelerate the pace of industrialization once we have figured out how to actually base that on a manufacturing industrial process which drives urbanization rather than an urbanization which is driven by poverty and social systems and services. Third fact, actually, African poverty is a lack of access to global power. You see, there are only four sources of serious power in the world today. Let me go through them quickly. One, violence. Capacity to mete out violence is the most important source of power in the world today. Any country which is able to obliterate all the other countries will run the world. Violence. Now, most people think that it's civilization that's the most important source of power in the world. No, it's violence. Just look at the world today and look at the pecking order. It's all to do with capacity to mete out violence. And unfortunately, it's at all levels. It's not even just at global level, even at local level. Those who are able to mete out violence are at the top of the pack. Number two, a source of power in the world is organized ideology, usually in religion and politics. Those who control knowledge and what people believe through dogma and ideology will wield a lot of power. Because doctrine that is driven in a religion, doctrine that's driven in politics, doctrine that's driven in an educational system will capture a lot of people. This is okay for primitive empires like Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, and even the colonial British Empire. But so it was important for them to create religions which they could use to colonize. It was important for them to create educational systems which were doctrine-driven to colonize, etc., and political systems that make it easy to control the colonized. Third source of power is money. If you have access to money and resources, you can buy one and two. You can buy means of violence. And if you've got cash, you can also buy means of controlling an organized ideology. You can actually find your way into controlling those in churches and those in educational systems and political structures. Number three, was money. Number four is knowledge. Knowledge is the fourth most important source of power in the world. And I don't even have to explain. The more knowledge is developed and shared, the more advanced society becomes. That's a lot of power. So let me tell you, therefore, what the thing is. Africans have very limited access to these four sources of power. Limited access to means of violence, very limited access to organized ideologies, because all of them were borrowed. We borrowed the political systems, we used foreign ideologies, we borrowed foreign religions, we used foreign doctrines, and we borrowed foreign educational systems which warp and distort how we then advance our own family, community, and industrial systems. And by the way, of these four sources of power, only source number four, knowledge, is the only source of power which will grow through sharing. I mean, the reason why Africa does not have access to the other sources of power is take source of violence. If you share that, then you lose power. So you don't share it. Same when you control people's doctrines and knowledge systems. Well, if you share other knowledge doctrine systems, you lose power. Money, if you share money, you lose power. So knowledge is the only source of power which can be shared, and it grows. And that explains why Africa is at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to all sources of power. Well, those are the three major facts I wanted to put on the table before I come back with some analysis shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to analysis of this general theory of African Renaissance. And that's where I'm containing some of my most important messages to all those in DWP. That's why I'm calling it the message also, because it's a wake-up call to accelerate the pace of knowledge development in Africa. We need to be creating these intellectual products for the advancement of our society. Because if you look world over, my analysis is that the entire world and the so-called developed countries, we are losing capacity to relate to each other as human beings. And at the same time, we're increasing the capacity for conflict. So it doesn't look good. And we are just kind of getting caught up in a world which is becoming a very violent, dangerous place. So I'll pack that on the side and say, but the key thing is that as we pick up the pace of African development, my analysis is that it simply boils down to modernizing what we have as Africans in terms of knowledge and belief systems and values, modernize them and create an advanced African society. We don't have to westernize. We have to modernize, not westernize. Why? Because the underlying reason we're in this quagmire is because our developmental strategies across the board are bankrupt of African wisdom. They are bankrupt of African cultural intelligence. They are not relevant to our people. This unorthodox structural transformation process where we have rapid urbanization and yet there's no manufacturing. We have no jobs in these cities. We are having our family systems crumbling and our community systems decaying before we even have state systems which are functional, because there's no economy to prop up such state machineries. It's so simple. Even the cities, it doesn't matter how much elections we have in the cities. We can elect councillors, mayors. The bottom line is our cities are not economically viable. They are broke. There is no manufacturing in these towns. They are commercial, industrial centers. So elections are not going to solve the ratepayer issues. There are no ratepayers because they don't have jobs. They don't have money. That's it. It's common sense that the state is not economically viable. The cities are not economically viable. So elections are not going to solve the problem. What solves the problem is addressing the unorthodox structural transformation process where majority of people are left out of the production and manufacturing processes. We have to make sure those small family farms, who are 80% of Africa's farmers, are actually the drivers of industrialization. They should be producing for the same factories and supermarkets that you get these big farms are producing for. That's all. So the idea that the Western style democracy where you have the state, civil society movements, and business working together, it's not working in Africa because there's no civil society to talk about in the true sense of the word. There are just foreign NGOs roaming around pretending and hoping they represent our people. People at community level are their own civil society, which should be dealing with its own issues. Why do we need foreign NGOs to deal with such matters? It's not working. The golden triangle of business, government, and civil society is a wrong model for Africa. It will work in an industrialized country because 95, 98% of the people are now urban. The systems are in place and the economies function to ensure that interest groups can represent themselves and try to find justice somewhere in between. So I'm not arguing against civil society or business. I'm just saying in Africa, when they say private sector business, they just mean big business. And yet majority of businesses are small. Same thing when they say civil society, they mean foreign big organizations. That's all I'm saying. So it is a wake-up call. The budget architectures of all our governments have to change completely so that they target people and uplift regions so that they are connected to the mainstream economy. Our budget architecture has to change so that we have more of a territorial development approaches and planning approaches, because we're looking for economic convergence where all regions connect economically We connect the rural to the urban regions. We connect the rich to the poor regions, so that we build comparative advantages across the economy. The policy agendas are to be more nationally driven, both at policy formulation stage and implementation. And we really have to go back to sponsoring a serious African Renaissance based on a cultural revolution, revamping those African values and belief systems. We can never beat the Americans at being Americans. Never. We can never beat the Chinese at being Chinese. Never. But we will beat all of them every day at being African, at being an advanced, innovative, and creative African society. We will beat them every day. Everyone will be headed for Africa by the middle of this century. If we go by my thinking around not just the general theory of African Renaissance and its basis, but the conclusion that it takes an African-driven knowledge system based on African circumstances and reality, and not just copying and pasting. So I'm not arguing against Asian or European knowledge systems. I'm simply saying we copy intelligently, we bring that knowledge system home, and we co-create it. We look at it from an African perspective. We add, subtract, multiply, whatever we have to do, adjust it to fit our circumstances. And don't be sold out that Western science has got answers to all problems. We know that. It has no answers to a lot of African problems. Western science has failed to answer the challenge of our family systems in Africa. It has no answer to our understanding of spirituality, our relationship with the environment. Science is just too limited in its ability to assist us. So we need to refresh the cultural vessel, introduce back into culture all the key ingredients, the entire element of life. All of life is culture. From language, education, production, manufacturing, business, governance, all of it is culture. This idea that we're given by the colonizers, that culture is just bits and pieces you do after work, and at weekends, dancing and singing. No, that is just one element of culture. The roots of African culture go back to strong individuals, strong family systems, strong community systems, strong villages. You can't build a strong nation based on weak villages and weak family system. It's just building a house backwards. So here in Africa, we are busy trying to build strong governments, through elections every 4 years, 5 years, spending all the money running up and down, trying to build strong city systems. They are crumbling. And we are hoping to do so based on increasingly poor individuals, increasingly poor families, increasingly poor communities. That's building a house backwards. It's not going to happen. And then finally, wealth creation for Africa ultimately is about refusing to be a dog, because what we've accepted as Africans is to be dogs of the world. Why dog? Because the dog is the only animal I know which will love and lick the master's boots. It doesn't matter how many times you can kick your dog and it will just scream and wail and run away for a few minutes, but within 30 minutes it's back again, licking your boots, hoping for the next meal. That's us. We have to refuse to be the dog of the world from now onwards. We have to create knowledge systems which really bequeath serious knowledge to subsequent generations, so that our youngsters are not just being educated by television and movies and thinking that they are in a Western world when they are in Africa. The entire life experience, food production systems, preservation, home improvement, the whole lot now has to be skills-based, helping our kids learn, how to solve problems, transmuting problems and challenges into business opportunities, and even basing this on cultural industries and cottage industries, proto industries. Just manufacture, just add value to whatever you have right there in the village, in the township. That's where we should start. So that's what I have to say on the analysis, and I'll be back shortly with conclusion. Thank you. Welcome back to conclusion, episode 18. I hope I have given you enough to think over in terms of the general theory of African Renaissance. In subsequent sessions, I'll go through stage by stage the Renaissance itself. But for today, I wanted to sell the idea that in all four spheres of society, social, cultural, business, economics, politics, governance, and technology environment, all the four, we are suffering in Africa. All 55 countries out of 55 are not doing well in all these four departments. Our society is decaying at all the levels. And then I turned around and said, based on a number of other philosophers that I follow thinking, when you have such serious common symptoms of problems throughout, maybe, and it's a real high probability that there is one underlying reason why all this is happening. Don't try and solve the million different little problems, a little bit on the business here, a little bit on the politics there. And the thing is to keep going and eliminating lower level problems to the deepest one. And I concluded the deepest one is that we are using knowledge systems which are irrelevant to Africa. We have abandoned our cultural base for knowledge. In other words, there is no cultural intelligence in our development strategies as Africans. We're just copying and pasting everything in every department. We are copying and pasting our family systems, the entire social cultural system. We are copying and pasting the business economic aspect, which excludes a lot of people instead of basing it on the African way that includes everybody. We are copying and pasting the politics and governance, which emphasizes numbers games, elections, and so on, and de-emphasize the most important things Africans do. That is, include others, share, deep dialogue, deep dialogue, and share responsibilities. So we must modernize, not westernize Africa. Africa is all we have. You and me, we are all we have. Answers lie within. The most important truth is that we discover for ourselves. Those are the highest values that create society. That's what at DWP, the next few sessions, we're going to drive the whole idea of looking at the knowledge systems from various angles to prepare Africa as the next economic superpower after the US and China by 2060 latest, and to prepare Africa for the most dominant culture in the world, because 2 out of every 5 human beings will be African before the end of this century. See you in the next segment. Thank you so much. Bye.